Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan. I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a bilingual cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court-appointed and private, marriage counseling using the EFT method, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide an individual one-on-one session in both French or English, and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found at lifecoachdanamzalai.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our fifth episode of Season 10, a very special guest and author of Exponential Theory and Strategic Facilitator, Aaron Baer. And just like every of my past episode, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Aaron, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dr. Dan, for having me on, and really excited to have this conversation and share my own happiness journey, and hopefully some of your listeners can get a lot out of that. This all dates back to when I was about 20, when I decided to embark on a journey that actually left my hometown of Fort Wayne, Indiana. So I grew up in this Midwestern town that wasn't very worldly or big thinker. And I decided to go on this journey on something called Semester at Sea, that I actually flew to the Bahamas, went to Brazil and South Africa and Kenya and Tanzania and India and Sri Lanka and Vietnam, Taiwan, China, Japan, and then actually all the way back to the US. So I circumnavigated the world on a boat, and not a boat, I shouldn't say that, it was actually a 500-foot ship. So it was quite an experience, but what it did is it accelerated my learning, and it gave me a point of view as going in and out of these different countries, that, we all have this really desire to be happy. And we also have this desire to make an impact and really, contribute to the world. And I saw this over and over again. It didn't matter where people were standing and what they were looking at. It was just, so I went on a journey, and candidly, in my 20s and early 30s, I was somewhat angry that I wasn't, where I thought I needed to be. Yet now I realize that I needed to be there to learn the lessons that were kept prompting me and teaching me. They kept coming up for me, and so blessed to now be hopefully a little older and hopefully a little wiser, definitely happier, and more content, just with everything that happens. It's not what happens to you, it's how you respond to it. And that actually in my book Exponential Theory, I really cover these 7 universal truths that really kind of create a framework for me that I generally share with my facilitating clients, and really work as kind of a way to kind of get people into the place where they're going to find the most flow. And that's something that I think has been my driver of happiness, is really to get to a place where things just happen easy, and life, just kind of seems to, like, the next thing falls in place because I'm actually at peace. I'm not resisting. What we resist persists is another universal truth. To think is to create. You are your habits. So when you start looking at these things, it starts to really create, what I would say is how I've really created this journey, to where I'm very happy where I'm at now. And definitely on any judgment of success. And I think this is kind of part of my own journey when I work with clients, is we often have personal success of what it would be defined to us. Yet I think there's a gap. And I see this when I work with celebrities and athletes and CEOs, where they always want to say what they think that the public would say, so. And there's actually a attribute values index and I think one of them is, people would say fame is like the highest indicator of success. That's number one publicly. The viewpoint is that fame would be it. Yet when we ask people privately, and this is from the book Collective Illusions, when we ask people privately, it's actually ranks last. And I think those incongruences are part of what I facilitate on an individual, a personal level, on a professional level, and then organizationally, I'm always having these conversations, whether I'm working with a board of directors or a CEO and their leadership team. It's amazing how the same issues always come about. And happiness is one of those things that everyone doesn't have enough of, if that makes sense.
Oh, it definitely makes sense. So tell us about, you said that in the beginning, you said that around your 20s or 30s, you didn't reach the level that you were expecting to reach. So what was that specific, I would say, goal that you had that you never really were able to reach and got disappointed and mad or angry about it?
Yeah, so it really comes down to this concept of how we judge public success, and for all intents and purposes, I worked at Accenture, which was actually one of the hardest places to get a job at the time. It's like they accepted 1 in 5,000 applicants. I was working 90 hours because that's what I was told I was supposed to do, and I was following all these normal paths of we say is, I went and got a graduate degree. I actually have 2 master's degrees, and all that was kind of driven from this concept of I wasn't enough. And I've, continued to follow that. And that was, I just need more and I need to get to the next level. And I was never literally present. I was literally always in the future. I wasn't in the past. And I think a lot of people have, and it's something I have a program called Exponential Mindset, Beliefs and Attitudes, which I've learned from 15 years of research for this book, Exponential Theory, is, people that really think big, they have a good relationship with their past. They have a good relationship maybe with their trauma, PTSD, limiting beliefs, their self-talk. You start to see it because if you don't have a good relationship, then that creeps into your future. Mm-hmm. And, your future, you create doubts, worries, stress, anxiety, fears, all those things that are just literally make believe. And what I found from studying these exponential leaders is a lot of them were very present, knowing that what they did right now created their future. Mm-hmm. They did not actually look back. And that's part of the exponential mindset that I really teach the executives I work with, is they did not anchor in the past, because if we look back, it's very linear. It's very chronological. To get to an exponential future, it's actually about accelerated change and growth. So we can't do what we did yesterday and expect to get there. And that's part of the world today, that we have to get an exponential mindset to wrap our heads around the change that's happening, because it's only going to happen faster. Like today's the slowest day, that we'll ever see again. Tomorrow things are just going to happen faster and faster and faster. And there's more information to consume and such. So it's part of that is when you're a CEO and you need to make decisions, you kind of get frozen. You get that analysis paralysis, which, is in the brain, you're really either working out of a primal function of fear of, and I always say false evidence appearing real, where it's fight, flight, or freeze. And then that really, dictates your automatic, your system 1, your limbic brain, where you're automatically kind of just going through the motions, but you can no longer go through the motions and actually create an exponential mindset. So it's somewhat, how do you disrupt yourself, or you will be disrupted? But in that same context is once you get to the prefrontal cortex, where you're literally your executive decision-making function, your system 2, it's very electrical, it's very intensive on energy. A lot of CEOs, if they're fighting that fear, they're not able to make those decisions. And what we do know about exponential leaders is that they're okay with making decisions and making mistakes. Mm-hmm. And that's because they learn from them. And that's, part of my own strategy is you either learn or win. The only time you fail is when you fail to learn. So it's part of part of the coaching that I do to CEOs, but as well as facilitating flow, which ultimately is a unique state that's somewhere, not in your primal mind of, fight, flight, or freeze, but somewhere between system 1 and 2, alpha, theta, maybe even gamma, where you're really just, things are easy and automatic. And I've really set my whole life up to really be in flow as much as possible, and then recovering from flow. And candidly, working with clients, we get about 10x the work out of people when they're actually in flow than someone that's not. And that's really deep work that they're able to accomplish, whatever field they're in. And we've learned a lot about flow from extreme athletes, because they just really they have to be in that flow state or they die. Or, you look at basketball players, if they think about their free throw shot, they will miss it. But if they're in flow and they're just like, they've done that muscle memory, they're actually able to pretty much hit those last second shots amazingly because they're connected to the energy around them. And I think that's the biggest thing about being happy too, is how do you push that energy out so that all those around you kind of feel that energy. And oftentimes, and I'm sorry I'm rambling here, but I'm just so passionate about this subject. My daughter, who's
I am too,
yeah.
obviously. But the thing is, as you and I know, happiness is not sustainable because obviously it's like an EKG, it goes up and down all through your life. So what kind of practice do you teach or that you preach to your clients to be able to, if something doesn't go from one day to the other and you feel a downhill of your level of happiness, how to get it back up? What do you need to do to be able to get back to the highs? Because everyone wants to always feel on top.
Yeah, so there was this show growing up, and probably shows my age, True Hollywood Stories, where everybody, reaches their peak of fame, and then every story was how they fell from fame too, which, as we talked about that before, is kind of a false illusion of what success is. And I think on a daily basis, what we do realize is we are on roller coasters. And part of some things I've learned from some Navy SEALs that I've worked with is if you just do 1% better every day, that's actually 37x better by the end of the year. So with that, it's impractical to what you're saying is that you're going to get 1% every day. It's like chutes and ladders, the kids game, where you get 1% better one day, you lose 3% the next, and then you actually might gain 5% the day after that. But it's that continual measurement of your progress. And I think part of resetting your attitude, your mindset should be this, growth mindset. That what we've learned is most exponential thinkers have a high growth mindset, that they're always wanting to learn, they're always wanting to improve. Their ego doesn't get in the way of learning, which, oftentimes people in power positions, their ego is really making all the decisions. All of a sudden, it's like, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay and they're actively listening to other people around them, not making those decisions just themselves in a vacuum. And the wisdom of crowds has proven to be more effective when it comes to, it doesn't mean that you build for consensus, because that's a false, but it's how do you build for action, is like I always say, is like, hey, if we can all act upon this, we may not all agree on this, but can we agree on the role we're in that? But those ups and downs, are something to manage, especially when you get bad news in a company, or someone gets fired, or, candidly death, or all these different things. It's really managing to understand, to be with that emotion at the time that you have it, and then understand you do control your emotion. So how do you actually have a good relationship with that before it becomes trauma, before it becomes bigger, which, we see that often when I'm working with executives. It really comes to this personal experience, as Dr. Dan, 90+% of our, synapses are formed by the time we're 18. So a childhood really comes into play. How people were parented, what friends they had, what relatives, how they were viewed in society, and what they made up about themselves, what stories they told themselves. And that's part of what I use is, we call it 0 to hero, is let's reset, get you to being mindful where you're in the moment. But how then do we write the hero's journey, a new story about who you are, and so you have a better relationship with your past, because whatever happened, as horrific as it may be, there's something to learn there, and we can create a better relationship. And the clients I work with, they create better relationship, and then it rewrites their story so they don't have those doubts and fears and worries and stresses that candidly were created when they were 7 years old or 8 years old, that they're reliving in a deja vu loop over and over again. So it's part of relearning, which I think is a big part of what I talk about is, self-help sucks because it says there's something wrong with you. But the reality is we're exactly where we need to be, all of us, no matter where we are. There's something we need to learn. And we may need to relearn some things that maybe were taught to us that aren't true about ourselves, or we've made true. And we may need to reprogram some beliefs and attitudes so that we can get that growth mindset and really grow into the potential of who we could be. And that idea for me is all around this book, Exponential Theory, where the theory is as you start to think bigger, you become more conscious. And it's kind of proven out through the leaders that are connected more than just their family or their small group. Once you start actually interacting with lots of different people, you start to have better empathy, better listening skills, and you actually learn a lot quicker because your mind is ready to learn in every situation versus like, hey, I already know this way. And we all have to fight as we get older to fight against our cognitive biases that we have, because those were all formed depending how strong they were formed. If they were formed around trauma or something, we have a hard time actually reprogramming those or creating new belief systems. Yeah, that's essential, funny, as a part of when I'm literally coaching businesses. It's essential for CEOs to have conversations about what happened in their childhood for them to really see their potential. So that's, and that goes to a leadership group is making sure we can create the space individually, personally, professionally, and organizationally to create the growth. And then once you have that alignment, you can actually start to see this idea of group flow where a leadership team all of a sudden just knows and has intuition of what the other wants, and they start working together at a much greater capacity. And that's where you really focus on these 10x gains when I'm working in the boardroom. And I work with companies like Daimler, Mercedes-Benz, and Coca-Cola, and we'll take their board of directors and or their leadership team, their top 100 different groups. And then we really kind of work on this programming to say, what is your belief system about what your division can do in your company? And right now, if you just look at it from an organizational perspective, every company in every industry is absolutely being disrupted. And even the top global companies, Apple and Amazon and those, their business models have in the last 10 years have shifted dramatically to what they're focused on and where they make revenue. And that has a lot of repercussions from all the people that work in those organizations, where if they're not personally and professionally ready to make those changes, they will be left by the wayside, and they'll have to reinvent themselves through disruption, which is what I always say is that you want to disrupt yourself, not be disrupted, because then you at least have some figure of understanding that you never have control over the situation, but you can actually create the situation or your future for you.
But do you feel like, for example, those who deal with past traumatic experience are much greater, or they have much greater difficulty to be able to erase those limiting beliefs from their mind to be able to grow to a point of success? Because obviously those who've been abused or whatever it is, or always been raised in an environment that was very toxic, that's kind of hard to be able to break that past and be able to reconstruct something completely different for them to start believing in themselves, believe in their decision, believe in everything else. So is your program very customizable for each and every one? Or when you talk to a group of leaders, how do you know who went through what? Because it's kind of like biased at this point.
Yeah, so I think it goes to first, as I'm not a psychotherapist, I don't have the qualifications, but in a group, I think it's having a conversation or creating the facilitated prompts so people can think about their past in a different way, because they have to have a better relationship with that. I think the idea of erasing it is not, you have to live with it and embrace it. And more so, I often just focus on what do we need to learn and relearn from this. Okay. And, and whether it is as simple as, not to ever be in that situation, you're going to work to kind of create prompts, but how do you talk through that where people can actually see themselves, where they get to the today, where they get present in their life? Because you can have a conversation with someone, and when you're facilitating a group, it becomes very obvious to those that live in the past, those that live in the future, and then those that are anchored in the present are sometimes can get frustrated just by the fact that we're always getting drugged back by the people in the past or held down by the people in the future. And the reality is we know that the future is now, and everything that we're going to create, if you're going to be exponential and you're really going to grow your belief system, you have to actually have a relationship. And I would say, and that's where I have no scientific, I'm not attempting to, I think mental health is a big part of what I talk about, because I think that there are so many influences that are negative on mental health, for compare culture, cancel culture, everything that's going on here is sometimes we feel like we cannot make a mistake. And part of a leadership group is to enable people to make lots of mistakes and to have empathy and to learn faster, because the faster they make mistakes, actually, the faster they're going to get there. And that's where, if you get real exponential leaders, it's okay to make mistakes. It's actually really good. Just make sure you learn from it. Let's not make mistakes 2-3 times. And part of that is then decoupling, if, and like you mentioned of trauma in the past, is how do you decouple that? Or how do you actually understand that maybe something that happened in the past could actually impact you making a decision right now or not making a decision right now? And that's ultimately, I focus on the business side of things. I think therapy, talk therapy, there's a bunch of different kind of therapies that I'm part of a neuroscience company called Vitania that works with PTSD patients to kind of balance the brain electrically and chemically. And that knowledge base kind of creeps over into this, but that works really well with talk therapy without, there's a bunch of different things that we're, I think, going through a breakthrough of how to deal with trauma, and flow is one of those things. Psychedelics, we're starting to learn, have some different opportunities to kind of break that strategy. So, but in the end, when I'm talking to leaders, it's really about how do you have a relationship with that so that you understand that it might impact how you approach every situation, and that we have to have a better relationship of would you learn or would you win from doing this or going through this, because the survivor mentality can be very powerful in the idea of I eat obstacles. And then if an obstacle comes up, is if I survive that, I can survive anything. And some of those people that have that mindset really, really, I see succeed in leadership groups, because what they're dealing with at the work level is so small compared to what they've actually been through and conquered. And we have those conversations openly in general about the whole group, but that's the great thing about facilitating is everyone then has their own individual self-talk conversation. And that's my goal, is that eventually once you kind of unearth those things, you can move the group into flow pretty quick. And group flow is like an orchestra playing, or, and my daughter is 14. I just went to a dance recital, and I'm just amazed about these young ladies that would be so in sync. And they weren't thinking about it. They just were just being in the moment, and they practiced it enough that you're just amazed that they could do that at that age and as much as they learned. And that goes to, athletes that snowboard or ski or do extreme sports. They make a mistake, they die. Mm-hmm. So, they're literally in peak performance and flow and all those kind of states. I'm starting to work with Flow Collective Research with Stephen Kotler and his group, which really their goal is to help groups get into flow, individuals to get into flow. And that's where happiness to me is, how do you kind of not want, and I always say this to, when is it that materialism, when is it that is enough, and when is it, can we just be happy with what we have and yet work towards that? So a lot of those things are all also pieces that help people get into flow. Now, flow is that same as happiness. It's kind of this journey of you have to have time for recovery. You cannot be in flow all the time, just like you're not able to be in happy all the time. It's like, then how do you actually manage the downtime? And part of that is, being in nature, grounding yourself, technically with, putting your feet on the earth. And there's a lot of different kind of spiritual things that, not necessarily religious, but that can give you some recuperation. And we talk about it at the corporate level. And it's an interesting conversation around mindfulness and how do you recover and that goes to meditation, it goes to breathing, it goes to taking a walk. All these simple things can all be things to recharge your batteries, because we're batteries. So whether we like it or not, we need recharged, and sleep's a big part of that. I often have a really difficult conversation with executives that wear their badge of honor is I sleep 4 hours a night or 6. It's like, well, that is why you're not very effective, because if you could get 2 or 3 more hours of sleep, you're going to actually make so many more better decisions, and you're going to be so much more present. And so that's kind of part of the coaching I do, which I'm not necessarily a coach, but through facilitating groups, we have those conversations, which often is an unconventional way to get to where we want. But that's also part of the strategy, is to have very useful information, which everybody wants to personally grow. then you kind of find out if they want to professionally or organizationally grow, or if they're checked out. That happens real quick. But getting personally engaged is part of what I think is my passion and professionalism and being a facilitator.
Even Jeff Bezos sleeps a minimum of 8 hours. He said no meeting before 10 a.m. He said, and he's the CEO of Amazon, or was the CEO of Amazon. So if he made it happen, anyone can as well. And for our last question here, don't you think that the leaders, the reason why they're hesitate to be able to make decisions, because there are consequences to those decisions. The board of directors can kick them out. They can get fired. So they hesitate. And you said that it's okay to be able to make mistakes, but those mistakes can cost the company millions of dollars. So how to go around limiting them or enabling them actually to be able to make those decisions? Don't be afraid and take that step or take that leap forward.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned Jeff Bezos, and I write about him in the book. And, if you've seen his own physique and everything, he's really taken these strategies of peak performance to that level. And then even wanting to be an astronaut is kind of part of that. Is like, how do I, achieve greater things? And when you have a company that's, worth trillions of dollars and, was an idea that was born out of your head, it's got to be, you got to keep your ego in check. And there's a lot of things there. So his mindfulness nature, he has a way that he makes decisions, and he calls them two-way doors. There's some decisions that are one-way doors that if we commit to this, we're going through and we're making that. If it's a two-way door, if we can go through and see what's on the other side and kind of learn from it, then go back. And that enables this whole culture of Amazon to make mistakes. And in fact, the Amazon Fire phone, not many people remember it, but it was one of the biggest failures of Amazon. That team, and a lot of other companies would have probably been fired after that. They're like, hey, you guys really failed. You guys screwed this up. But that making mistakes mentality and part of it is that team went on to create the Alexa, which is now their biggest advance. Part of that team went on. So one of it is retraining your board of directors and the analyst if you're a public company. And that's what Jeff Bezos, for 19 years, he had negative quarters, yet it continued to increase and just said, this is our vision. He retrained analysts that Amazon had a different consideration set because he had a longer term vision. And that's part of, in my book, I have this idea of Mars shots that I use Elon Musk, where I'm sure you've heard of Google's moon shots, where they're like, hey, let's take really big shots at the moon like JFK did. And, saying we're going to go to the moon by the end of this decade. Mars shots is we're going to go to Mars by 2040. And whether he succeeds or not, SpaceX now is literally shuttling astronauts back and forth to the space station, launching satellites on a monthly basis of a satellite company. So the idea is that even if he fails and he never gets there, he's succeeded beyond any other privatized space company. That goes to a lot of the other goals he has, is really thinking bigger than oneself, because he's also started to win the war on talent. Like if, NASA was always somewhere that people really, one of the best places to work, and the turnover was really low because it was just prestigious. Now SpaceX is actually pulling people from that. And it's because their mission is so much bigger than what NASA's is now. And I think it attracts those big-minded, the people that are thinking big. And that's why the book is The Power of Thinking Big, because once you embrace that, you start attracting other big thinkers around you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Aaron, that is unfortunately all the time that we have for today's podcast. I really do appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us. And thank you again for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your incredible story. Now, we hope that you've all enjoyed today's episode. I'm also very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for season 10 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories just like the one that you're listening to today. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. Being selfish has nothing to do with focusing on yourself. To be able to help others, you must first serve yourself. How can you make people happy if you aren't satisfied with yourself? How can you offer much of anything if you have nothing left to give, if you're a sort of person who provides to others? Before you can consider selflessness, you must first learn to focus on your own well-being. The truth is that you will always encounter individuals who want you to forget about yourself and concentrate on them. Learn to be aware of your own requirements. Ignore the requests since everything revolves around them. You must first understand that self-interest in your mental health should be your first priority. After you focus on your own well-being, any time you have left may be shared with others. Figuring out how to achieve happiness from inside is the secret to happiness. This is the first step on the path to successful voyage. My name is Dr. Dan Amzalag, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.